I should have known something was terribly wrong when my husband Derek started making detailed lists of every gift he'd ever given me during our 8-year marriage. But sitting in that courtroom in downtown Millbrook, watching his smug face as he demanded the return of my engagement ring, wedding jewelry, and even the coffee maker he'd bought for my birthday, that's when I realized he had no idea what kind of woman he was really dealing with. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. My name is Victoria Ashford, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. At 32, I was a senior financial analyst at Pinnacle Investment Group, one of Millbrook's most prestigious wealth management firms. I'd built my career on precision, attention to detail, and an almost supernatural ability to spot financial irregularities that others missed. These skills, which had made me invaluable to my clients, would soon prove equally devastating to my soon-to-be ex-husband. Derek Ashford was everything I thought I wanted in a partner when we met 9 years ago at a charity fundraiser for the Millbrook Children's Hospital. He was a successful real estate developer, tall and confident with that easy charm that made everyone in the room gravitate toward him. Derek had built Ashford Development from nothing into one of the city's most respected commercial property companies, specializing in luxury downtown condominiums and upscale shopping centers. Our life together looked picture-perfect from the outside. We lived in a stunning penthouse in the prestigious Riverside district, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Millbrook River and the rolling hills beyond. The apartment was a testament to Derek's success: marble countertops, hardwood floors that gleamed under designer pendant lighting, and a wine cellar that housed bottles worth more than most people's cars. We drove matching luxury vehicles, vacationed in Europe twice a year, and hosted dinner parties for Millbrook's elite business community. If you like the story of our channel, please like the channel, and if you are interested in these stories, join our channel membership. Thank you. What made our relationship special, or so I thought, was how we complemented each other professionally. Derek understood the property market like few others, while I had an intuitive grasp of investment strategies and financial planning. We often collaborated on deals, with me analyzing the financial viability of his development projects and him providing insights into real estate trends that informed my investment recommendations to clients. Derek was generous with gifts throughout our marriage, and I genuinely believed each one represented his love and commitment to our relationship. The engagement ring was a stunning 3-carat diamond in a platinum setting that had cost him nearly $40,000. For our first anniversary, he'd given me a vintage Cartier watch that had belonged to his grandmother. Our second anniversary brought matching pearl earrings and a necklace set that he had custom designed by a local jeweler, but Derek's generosity extended beyond jewelry. He'd furnished our entire penthouse, claiming he wanted me to feel surrounded by beautiful things. The Italian leather furniture, the original artwork from local artists, even the professional-grade coffee machine that I used every morning, all of it came with the story that he simply wanted to spoil the woman he loved for birthdays and holidays. Derek was thoughtful and creative. He'd given me a first-edition copy of my favorite novel, a silk scarf from Paris that he brought back from a business trip, and a professional massage chair for the home office where I often worked late into the evening. Each gift came with a handwritten note expressing his love and gratitude for having me in his life. I treasured these gifts not for their monetary value, but for what I believed they represented: a man who paid attention to my interests, who wanted to make me happy, and who saw our marriage as a partnership worth investing in. The jewelry made me feel beautiful and cherished, while the household items created the comfortable, luxurious environment where we built our life together. What I didn't realize was that Derek was keeping meticulous records of every purchase. In his mind, apparently, these weren't expressions of love but rather strategic investments that he could reclaim if our marriage ever ended. While I was building emotional attachments to symbols of our relationship, he was creating a detailed inventory for potential future litigation. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared 6 months ago when I noticed some irregularities in Derek's business accounts. As a financial analyst, I had access to our joint financial records, and something about the cash flow patterns in Ashford Development didn't align with the project timelines Derek had described to me. There were large unexplained expenditures, mysterious client payments, and a concerning pattern of funds being moved between accounts in ways that seemed designed to obscure their true purpose. When I brought these concerns to Derek, he dismissed them with the casual confidence that had always been part of his charm. "You worry too much about details, Vic," he'd said, using the nickname that had once felt intimate but now seemed dismissive. "Real estate development is complicated. There are always moving pieces that don't look neat and tidy on a spreadsheet." But my analytical mind couldn't let it go. The patterns I was seeing reminded me of cases I'd worked on involving financial fraud and money laundering. The red flags were subtle but unmistakable to someone trained to spot them. Derek wasn't just running a successful development company, he was operating some kind of elaborate financial scheme that I was only beginning to understand. As I started digging deeper into our financial records, I discovered something that changed everything. Derek had been systematically documenting every gift he'd given me, complete with receipts, photographs, and estimated current values. The folder I found in his home office contained detailed inventories that read like insurance claims rather than love letters. The engagement ring, $39,500, with annual appreciation estimates. The anniversary watch, $12,000, with documentation about its vintage value increasing. Even smaller items like books and scarves were cataloged with purchase prices and current market values. It was clear that Derek had never seen these gifts as expressions of love. They were assets he planned to recover if needed. That's when I realized I wasn't just married to a man who kept detailed records, I was married to someone who had been planning for the failure of our marriage from the very beginning. Every gift, every gesture of generosity, every symbol of love had been calculated with an exit strategy in mind. The divorce papers were filed 2 weeks later, and Derek's true nature became crystal clear. His attorney had prepared a comprehensive list of items Derek was demanding back, claiming they were loans or conditional gifts that reverted to him upon the dissolution of our marriage. He wanted everything: the jewelry, the furniture, the artwork, even kitchen appliances and books. What Derek didn't know was that his meticulous record-keeping had given me something far more valuable than the gifts themselves: a complete map of his financial behavior and evidence of the fraud I was beginning to uncover. The man who thought he was so clever keeping track of every gift had actually handed me the keys to his destruction. As I sat in that courtroom listening to his demands, I smiled for the first time in months. Derek wanted his gifts back? I was going to give him exactly what he deserved, and it was going to be far more than he ever bargained for. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. To understand how completely Derek's betrayal shattered my world, you need to know exactly what kind of life we had built together over 8 years of marriage. From the outside, Victoria and Derek Ashford were Millbrook's golden couple, successful, attractive, and seemingly devoted to each other. We were the kind of pair that other couples pointed to as relationship goals, the ones who made marriage look effortless and glamorous. Our penthouse in the Riverside district was more than just a home. It was a carefully curated showcase of our combined success. The building itself was one of Derek's early development projects, a sleek 30-story tower that had transformed Millbrook's waterfront into a luxury residential district. Living on the 28th floor gave us panoramic views of the river, the historic downtown district, and the Whitmore Mountains in the distance. Derek had spared no expense in creating what he called our sanctuary. The open-concept living space featured exposed brick walls from the building's original industrial foundation, paired with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. The kitchen was a chef's dream, with granite countertops imported from Italy, professional-grade appliances, and a wine refrigerator that housed Derek's growing collection of rare vintages. Every piece of furniture told a story of Derek's thoughtfulness and attention to detail. The leather sectional sofa where we spent countless Sunday afternoons reading the financial papers had been custom-ordered from a boutique furniture maker in Florence. The dining room table, crafted from reclaimed walnut, could seat 12 people, and had hosted some of Millbrook's most exclusive dinner parties. Even our bedroom furniture, a massive 4-poster bed with matching armoires, had been selected specifically because Derek knew I loved antique pieces with modern functionality. The artwork throughout our home reflected Derek's understanding of my tastes and interests. He'd commissioned local artists to create pieces that spoke to my love of abstract expressionism, and our hallway featured a rotating collection of photographs from our travels together. The crown jewel was an original painting by renowned local artist Helena Crane, which Derek had purchased as a surprise for my 30th birthday after I'd mentioned admiring her work at a gallery opening. Our professional lives were equally impressive and complementary. At Pinnacle Investment Group, I managed portfolios for some of Millbrook's wealthiest families, including old money dynasties like the Weatherbys and the Thornfields. My reputation for spotting profitable investments and protecting clients from financial risks had made me one of the youngest senior analysts in the firm's history. I took pride in my ability to see patterns that others missed, to find opportunities in market volatility, and to protect my clients' wealth through careful strategic planning. Derek's success in real estate development was built on his ability to envision what Millbrook could become. While other developers focused on quick residential projects, Derek specialized in mixed-use developments that combined luxury living with upscale retail and dining. His flagship project, Riverside Commons, had revitalized an entire district of the city and established him as a visionary in urban planning. What made our relationship special was how seamlessly our professional expertise combined. When Derek was considering a new development project, he would run the financial projections by me, and I would analyze the market conditions, demographics, and economic indicators that would determine the project's success. When my clients were interested in real estate investments, Derek provided insights into market trends and property values that helped them make informed decisions. We were invited to every important social event in Millbrook. The annual Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala, the Millbrook Country Club's Summer Festival, opening nights at the Riverside Theater. Our presence was expected and welcomed at all of them. Other couples sought our company, and we genuinely enjoyed being part of Millbrook's business and social elite. Our marriage seemed to be built on mutual respect and shared ambitions. Derek encouraged my career advancement and celebrated my professional achievements as enthusiastically as his own. When I was promoted to senior analyst, he threw a surprise party at our penthouse, inviting colleagues and friends to celebrate what he called the success of the smartest woman in Millbrook. When Derek was featured on the cover of Millbrook Business Monthly as Developer of the Year, I organized a dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant to honor his accomplishment, the gift-giving that would later become evidence of Derek's calculated deception felt genuine and romantic at the time. For our first anniversary, he presented me with the vintage Cartier watch that had belonged to his grandmother, along with a handwritten letter explaining how he wanted me to have something that represented the continuation of family traditions. and lasting love. I wore that watch every day, feeling connected not just to Derek but to the Ashford family history. Our second anniversary brought the pearl jewelry set that Derek had commissioned from Millbrook's premier jeweler, Belmont and Associates. He'd worked with the designer for months to create pieces that would complement my skin tone and personal style. The necklace and earrings weren't just expensive, they were thoughtful, created specifically for me with careful attention to my preferences. Derek's generosity extended to practical gifts that enhanced our daily life together. The professional coffee machine that he'd given me for my 29th birthday came with a note saying he wanted to make sure I started every day with something that brought me joy. The massage chair for my home office was his response to my complaints about back pain from long hours analyzing financial reports. These gifts felt like expressions of his desire to take care of me and make our shared life as comfortable as possible. Our travel experiences together created memories that I treasured as much as any physical gift. Derek planned elaborate vacation itineraries that combined his love of architecture and design with my interest in financial markets and cultural history. We spent 2 weeks in Switzerland, where Derek studied sustainable building techniques, while I met with private bankers to understand European wealth management strategies. Our trip to Japan combined Derek's fascination with minimalist design and my curiosity about the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Even our social circle reinforced the image of our perfect marriage. Our closest friends were other power couples, James and Rebecca Whitmore, who ran the city's largest philanthropic foundation, David and Catherine Sterling, who owned a chain of upscale restaurants, and Michael and Diana Everett, who had built a successful architectural firm together. These couples looked to Derek and me as an example of how two successful professionals could build a life that enhanced both their individual careers and their relationship. Derek and I had talked extensively about our future plans. We wanted children eventually, and Derek had already identified properties where we could build a family home that would accommodate a growing family while maintaining our connection to Millbrook's business district. We discussed taking a sabbatical to travel extensively through Asia, where Derek wanted to study innovative urban planning techniques and I was interested in emerging market economies. Our financial planning was equally collaborative. We maintained joint accounts for household expenses and shared investments, while keeping separate accounts for our individual professional activities. This arrangement gave us both independence and shared accountability, and it allowed us to work together on major financial decisions while respecting each other's expertise and judgment. The trust between us felt absolute and unshakable. Derek had keys to my office at Pinnacle, and I had full access to his development company's financial records. We shared passwords, co-signed loans, and made major purchases together. The level of financial and personal transparency in our relationship was something I took pride in. We were true partners in every sense of the word. Looking back now, I realized that what I interpreted as transparency was actually Derek's way of keeping track of every asset and transaction in our relationship. While I was building emotional connections to our shared life, he was creating a detailed inventory for potential future litigation. But at the time, I genuinely believed we were building something permanent and meaningful together. The penthouse, the gifts, the social status, the professional collaboration, all of it felt like evidence of a love story that would last forever. I had no idea that Derek was documenting every detail as potential evidence in a future legal battle. The man I thought was building a life with me was actually preparing for the day he would tear it all down. The first sign that something was shifting in Derek's behavior came during what should have been one of our happiest moments together. We were celebrating the successful completion of his latest project, North Shore Plaza, a mixed-use development that had exceeded all projected sales targets. The launch party was held at the penthouse, with Millbrook's business elite gathered to toast Derek's latest triumph. I had prepared a presentation showing the financial projections I'd helped him develop, demonstrating how the project would generate sustained revenue for years to come, but instead of basking in our shared success, Derek seemed distracted and almost agitated throughout the evening. He kept checking his phone, excusing himself for private calls, and when guests congratulated him on our teamwork, he gave vague responses that minimized my contributions. At one point, when Rebecca Whitmore commented on how lucky Derek was to have a wife who could provide such sophisticated financial analysis, Derek actually corrected her, saying that he'd handled the financial planning entirely on his own. I was stunned by this revision of history, but I chalked it up to stress and the pressure of being the center of attention. Derek had always been confident, but he'd never been dishonest about crediting my work before. When I brought it up later that evening, he apologized and claimed he'd been overwhelmed by the evening's conversations and hadn't meant to downplay my role. The phone calls became more frequent after that night. Derek had always been accessible to clients and contractors, but suddenly he was receiving calls at odd hours that required him to step away from whatever we were doing together. Weekend mornings that we'd traditionally spent reading financial papers and planning our week were interrupted by urgent business matters that couldn't wait until Monday. Romantic dinners were cut short by emergencies that demanded Derek's immediate attention. When I asked about the increased demands on his time, Derek explained that success came with responsibilities. North Shore Plaza's success had generated interest from investors and potential partners throughout the region, and he was fielding opportunities that could expand Ashford development into neighboring cities. The explanation made sense, and I was proud that Derek's reputation was attracting such high-level interest, but the pattern of secretive behavior extended beyond business calls. Derek started receiving text messages that he would read quickly and then delete, often with a slight smile that he thought I didn't notice. When his phone would buzz during dinner or while we were watching television, he would glance at it with an eagerness that seemed disproportionate to normal business communications. If I was nearby when these messages arrived, Derek would angle his phone away from me or wait until I left the room to respond. Derek's relationship with technology had always been straightforward and transparent. We'd shared calendar access, and he'd never been secretive about his communications. Seeing him suddenly become protective of his phone and laptop was jarring, but when I mentioned it, he laughed off my concerns and said that investor communications often contained confidential information that he was legally obligated to keep private. Around the same time, Derek's spending patterns began to change in ways that puzzled me. As someone who made her living analyzing financial behavior, I couldn't help but notice when familiar patterns shifted. Derek had always been generous with himself and others, but his purchases became more extravagant and less practical. He bought expensive cologne that he'd never shown interest in before, upgraded his wardrobe with designer suits that cost more than some people's cars, and started frequenting an upscale men's grooming salon that charged premium prices for services he'd previously handled at a standard barber shop. The physical changes were subtle but noticeable. Derek joined an exclusive fitness club downtown, claiming that investors expected him to look successful and that maintaining his appearance was a business necessity. He started spending hours each morning on grooming routines that had previously taken him 15 minutes. His hair was styled differently, his posture seemed more deliberate, and he carried himself with a new kind of confidence that felt almost performative. More concerning were the changes in Derek's work schedule and travel patterns. Business trips that had previously been planned weeks in advance were suddenly arising with little notice. Derek would announce on Thursday evening that he needed to fly to Riverside Springs or Millfield Harbor for urgent meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. These last-minute trips always seemed to involve new investors or potential partners that Derek was eager to cultivate. What struck me as odd was Derek's reluctance to discuss these new business relationships in detail. Previously, he'd shared every aspect of his professional life with me, seeking my financial perspective on potential deals and partnerships. Now, when I asked about these mysterious investors or what opportunities they were presenting, Derek would give vague responses about confidentiality agreements and preliminary discussions that weren't ready for analysis. The most unsettling change was in Derek's attitude toward our shared financial planning. For 8 years, we'd made major financial decisions together, combining his market knowledge with my analytical expertise to build our wealth strategically. Suddenly, Derek was making significant purchases without consulting me, opening new business accounts that he claimed were necessary for the expanding operations, and restructuring investments in ways that seemed to reduce my access to information about our overall financial picture. When I discovered that Derek had opened a private investment account that wasn't linked to our joint financial management system, I felt the first real stab of alarm. Derek explained that the account was necessary for managing investor funds for his new projects, but the explanation felt rehearsed and incomplete. The Derek I'd married would have walked me through every detail of such an arrangement, would have asked for my professional opinion on the account structure and investment strategy. Derek's behavior toward our social circle also began to shift during this period. At gatherings with our usual crowd, he seemed less interested in the group conversations that had always energized him and more focused on private side discussions with individuals I didn't recognize. He started accepting invitations to events that he attended alone, claiming they were networking opportunities that wouldn't interest me or that were specifically for developers and contractors. The gift-giving that had always been such a sweet part of our relationship took on a different quality during this time. Derek continued to buy me presents, but they felt more calculated than spontaneous. A silk scarf from his business trip to Riverside Springs came with a detailed story about the boutique where he'd found it and how he'd thought of me the moment he saw it. But something about the presentation felt scripted, as if Derek had rehearsed the story before giving me the gift. More puzzling was Derek's sudden interest in documenting these gifts with photographs. He started taking pictures of me wearing new jewelry or using household items he'd given me, claiming he wanted to capture my happiness but spending so much time getting the perfect shot that the spontaneity felt forced. At the time, I thought Derek was becoming more sentimental about preserving memories of our life together. I had no idea he was creating evidence for future legal proceedings. Derek's treatment of our household staff also changed during this period. We employed a housekeeper, Miriam Santos, who came twice a week to maintain the penthouse. Miriam had worked for us for 3 years and had become almost like family, someone we trusted completely and who took genuine pride in caring for our home. Suddenly, Derek started giving Miriam specific instructions about when she could and couldn't access certain areas of the penthouse, particularly his home office and our bedroom. When I asked Derek about these new restrictions, he explained that he was working on confidential development projects that required increased security measures. But Miriam later mentioned to me that Derek had asked her to keep detailed logs of any items she moved or cleaned, including gifts and personal belongings. This level of inventory tracking seemed excessive for normal household management, but Derek insisted it was necessary for insurance purposes. The most troubling change was in Derek's physical and emotional availability. The man who had once been completely present during our time together seemed increasingly distracted and distant. During conversations, I would catch him staring off into space with an expression I couldn't read. When I asked what he was thinking about, Derek would snap back to attention and claim he was just processing business challenges or planning future projects. Our intimate life began to suffer as well. Derek seemed less interested in physical closeness and more focused on maintaining his new grooming and fitness routines. He started sleeping later in the morning and going to bed earlier in the evening, often claiming exhaustion from his increased work demands. The spontaneous affection and easy physical connection that had characterized our relationship for 8 years was gradually replaced by a more formal, almost polite interaction style. By the time these changes had been accumulating for several months, I found myself questioning my own perceptions. Derek had explanations for everything, and they all sounded reasonable when considered individually. Increased business success naturally led to more demands on his time. Expanding operations required new financial structures and confidentiality measures. The competitive nature of real estate development meant that appearance and networking were crucial for continued success, but my analytical training had taught me to look for patterns rather than isolated incidents, and the pattern that was emerging suggested that Derek was compartmentalizing his life in ways that excluded me from increasingly large portions of his daily experience. The man who had once shared everything with me was systematically creating separate spaces, separate relationships, and separate priorities that didn't include his wife. I told myself that this was probably a temporary phase, a natural result of Derek's business success creating new pressures and opportunities. I convinced myself that once he adjusted to the increased demands of his expanding company, our relationship would return to its previous intimacy and transparency. I had no idea that Derek wasn't adapting to new circumstances. He was actively creating them, building a separate life that would eventually replace the one we'd shared. The moment that would change everything began 3 weeks before Derek filed for divorce, though I wouldn't understand the significance until much later. It started with what seemed like a routine request for help with a financial audit of Ashford Development. Derek explained that his new investors were requiring a comprehensive review of the company's assets and liabilities, and he needed my expertise to prepare documentation that would satisfy their due diligence requirements. I was thrilled that Derek was finally including me in his expanding business operations again, after months of feeling excluded from his professional growth. This felt like a return to the collaborative partnership that had defined our relationship. Derek presented me with boxes of financial records, receipts, and documentation spanning the entire 8-year history of our marriage, claiming that the investors wanted to understand not just business assets but also personal financial stability and lifestyle expenses. What I thought was a comprehensive business audit was actually Derek's methodical preparation for divorce proceedings. Every document he asked me to review and organize was related to gifts, shared purchases, and joint investments that he would later claim in court. Under the guise of investor requirements, Derek had me create detailed spreadsheets cataloging every significant purchase made during our marriage, complete with original purchase prices, current estimated values, and depreciation calculations. The engagement ring that Derek had presented as a symbol of eternal love was listed in the documentation as a conditional gift pending successful marriage completion. The vintage Cartier watch that supposedly represented family tradition was categorized as a family heirloom on temporary loan. Even kitchen appliances and furniture were classified as business expenses for entertaining clients rather than shared household items. Derek watched me work through these documents with an intensity that I mistook for professional appreciation. He would hover over my shoulder as I entered data into spreadsheets, asking detailed questions about my valuation methods and suggesting specific ways to categorize different types of purchases. When I questioned some of the unusual classifications, Derek explained that investors often had specific requirements for how assets were categorized and that accuracy was crucial for maintaining their confidence in his business operations. The most disturbing aspect of this process was Derek's insistence on photographing everything. He claimed that the investors required visual documentation to accompany the financial records, so we spent entire weekends taking pictures of jewelry, artwork, furniture, and even books and decorative items throughout the penthouse. Derek was meticulous about these photographs, ensuring that serial numbers, designer labels, and condition details were clearly visible. During the same period, Derek began scheduling what he called investor meetings that required him to be away from the penthouse for extended periods. These meetings always seemed to coincide with times when I would be working late at Pinnacle or attending professional conferences. Derek would leave detailed instructions about how to handle any business calls that came to the house, and he would check in frequently to make sure everything was going smoothly in his absence. What I didn't realize was that Derek was using these absences to meet with divorce attorneys and financial advisors, building a legal strategy designed to reclaim as many marital assets as possible. While I was loyally organizing the documentation that he claimed would impress his investors, Derek was sharing those same documents with legal professionals who were advising him on the most effective ways to dissolve our marriage while minimizing his financial losses. Derek's behavior during this period took on an almost manic quality of preparation and organization. He started making copies of every important document in our household, from insurance policies to warranty information for major appliances. He claimed this was necessary for creating comprehensive backup records that would protect us in case of fire, theft, or other emergencies. In reality, Derek was ensuring that he would have access to all documentation regardless of how our living situation might change in the future. The manipulation extended to our social interactions during this time. Derek began hosting dinner parties and gatherings with a specific guest list that I now realize was carefully curated to serve as potential witnesses in divorce proceedings. He invited people who could testify to his generosity and gift-giving, to my apparent satisfaction with our lifestyle, and to what would appear to be my acknowledgement of Derek's ownership of our shared possessions. At one particularly elaborate dinner party, Derek made a point of showing guests around the penthouse, describing in detail how he had selected and purchased various items specifically to create a beautiful environment for me. He told stories about finding the perfect artwork, choosing furniture that would complement my tastes, and going to extraordinary lengths to surprise me with gifts that reflected his understanding of my preferences. The guests were charmed by what seemed like romantic thoughtfulness, but Derek was actually creating a narrative about his role as the provider and my role as the grateful recipient. Derek also began insisting that we update our insurance policies and estate planning documents. He explained that his expanding business interests required more sophisticated financial protection, and he wanted to ensure that all of our assets were properly documented and protected. This seemed like responsible financial planning, but Derek was actually creating legal documentation that would support his claims about asset ownership and distribution in the event of divorce. The process of updating these documents required detailed inventories of all our possessions, which Derek insisted on creating himself. He spent hours going through every room of the penthouse, cataloging items with obsessive attention to detail. When I offered to help, Derek declined, saying that this kind of work required a level of precision that he preferred to handle personally. I was touched by what I interpreted as Derek's desire to take responsibility for protecting our shared wealth. During this same period, Derek's relationship with our financial advisor, Thomas Brookfield, became more secretive and intensive. Derek started scheduling private meetings with Thomas, claiming that some of the new investment opportunities required confidential discussions that couldn't include me until certain legal requirements were met. When I asked Thomas about these meetings during a routine portfolio review, he seemed uncomfortable and gave vague responses about preliminary discussions that weren't ready for full disclosure. Derek's treatment of our household staff also became more systematic and deliberate during this preparation phase. He started giving Miriam Santos specific instructions about maintaining detailed logs of her work, including which items she cleaned, moved, or had any contact with during her visits to the penthouse. He explained that the increased documentation was necessary for insurance purposes, but he was actually creating a paper trail that would support his claims about ownership and care of various possessions, the most manipulative aspect of Derek's preparation was how he used my own professional expertise against me. Knowing that I took pride in my analytical accuracy and attention to detail, Derek framed all of his documentation requests as opportunities for me to demonstrate my skills and contribute to his business success. He praised my work on the asset inventories, complimented my organizational abilities, and expressed gratitude for my willingness to help him meet the demanding requirements of sophisticated investors. I threw myself into this work with enthusiasm, believing that I was finally being included in Derek's expanding professional world and that my contributions were valued and appreciated. Every spreadsheet I created, every photograph I helped organize, every document I reviewed was actually ammunition that Derek would use against me in divorce court. My own meticulous work ethic and professional standards were being weaponized to support legal arguments that would be designed to leave me with as little as possible from our 8-year marriage. Derek's preparation extended to manipulating our social and professional networks as well. He began scheduling individual meetings with mutual friends and business associates, ostensibly to discuss potential investment opportunities or collaborative projects. During these conversations, Derek would casually mention his concerns about my work stress, my increasingly demanding schedule at Pinnacle, and what he characterized as my growing dissatisfaction with our lifestyle and relationship. These subtle character assassinations were designed to plant seeds of doubt about my stability and commitment to our marriage, creating a narrative that would support Derek's eventual claims that our relationship had been deteriorating due to my professional ambitions and changing priorities. Friends who had always seen us as a devoted couple began to view me with subtle suspicion, wondering if Derek's hints about relationship problems were signs of issues they had missed. The final piece of Derek's preparation involved establishing alternative living arrangements and financial structures that would allow him to transition smoothly out of our shared life. He began renting a temporary office space downtown, claiming that his expanding business required a professional environment separate from the home office where we had worked together for years. This office became Derek's base of operations for his divorce planning, a place where he could meet with attorneys, organize documentation, and prepare for legal proceedings without any risk of discovery. By the time Derek was ready to file for divorce, he had spent months systematically documenting, photographing, and categorizing every aspect of our shared life in ways that would support his legal claims. He had manipulated me into creating the very evidence that would be used against me, convinced me that I was contributing to our shared success while actually facilitating my own financial destruction, and positioned himself as the generous provider whose gifts and investments deserved legal protection and recovery. The morning Derek served me with divorce papers will forever be etched in my memory as the moment my entire world shifted on its axis. It was a Tuesday in early October, one of those crisp autumn days when Millbrook looked like a postcard with the maple trees lining Riverside Drive turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I had woken up early to review quarterly reports before a crucial client presentation at Pinnacle, and Derek seemed unusually solicitous, bringing me coffee in bed and commenting on how beautiful I looked in the morning light streaming through our bedroom windows. "I have something important to discuss with you tonight," Derek had said, kissing my forehead in what I thought was an affectionate gesture. "Can we plan on dinner at home? I'll cook that salmon dish you love, and we can talk about some exciting new developments in my business." I spent the entire day at Pinnacle feeling unusually optimistic about whatever Derek wanted to share. Perhaps the mysterious investor meetings were finally ready to include me, or maybe he had decided to expand Ashford development in ways that would benefit from my financial expertise. I even left work an hour early, stopping by Belmont and Associates to pick up a bottle of champagne that I thought would be perfect for celebrating whatever good news Derek had to share. When I arrived at the penthouse that evening, Derek was indeed in the kitchen preparing dinner, but something felt different about his demeanor. He was moving with a kind of nervous energy that didn't match his usual confident ease, and he avoided making eye contact when I greeted him with a kiss and showed him the champagne I'd brought. The dining room table was set more formally than usual, with our wedding china and crystal glasses that we typically reserved for special occasions. "This looks wonderful," I said, admiring the carefully prepared meal. "What's the occasion? Are we celebrating something specific, or are you just feeling romantic?" Derek's smile seemed forced as he poured wine into our glasses. "Let's sit down and eat first. We can talk about everything over dessert." The dinner conversation felt strained and artificial, with Derek asking questions about my work that seemed designed to fill time rather than express genuine interest. He commented repeatedly on the penthouse and our possessions, making observations about the artwork, furniture, and decorative items that struck me as oddly nostalgic, as if he was memorizing details for some purpose I couldn't understand. "Remember when we bought that painting?" Derek said, gesturing toward the Helena Crane original that dominated our living room wall. "I spent months researching her work to find exactly the right piece for this space. I wanted something that would capture your personality and complement the penthouse's aesthetic." "Of course I remember," I replied, puzzled by the wistful tone in his voice. "It was my 30th birthday present. You said you wanted to give me something that would become more valuable over time, just like our relationship." Derek's expression shifted slightly at my response, and he quickly changed the subject to ask about my plans for the following week. The entire conversation felt like he was following some kind of script, hitting specific topics and themes that didn't flow naturally from genuine curiosity or affection. After dinner, Derek disappeared into his home office for several minutes, returning with a manila envelope that he placed on the coffee table between us. His hands were trembling slightly as he sat down across from me, and for the first time that evening, he looked directly into my eyes. "Victoria, what I'm about to share with you is going to be difficult to hear, but I need you to understand that this decision comes from a place of honesty about who we've both become and what we both deserve." My stomach clenched with the first real wave of alarm. "Derek, you're scaring me. What kind of decision? What's in the envelope?" "Our marriage isn't working anymore, Vic. We've grown apart professionally and personally, and I think we both know that we've been going through the motions for months now rather than truly connecting as partners." The words hit me like a physical blow, but Derek continued speaking in the same measured tone, as if he was delivering a rehearsed presentation to a business client. "I've filed for divorce, and these are the papers that formalize the dissolution of our marriage. I've also included a comprehensive list of assets that I'll be reclaiming, since most of our shared possessions were purchased by me as individual gifts rather than joint investments." I stared at the envelope as if it contained a bomb, unable to process what Derek was telling me. "Divorce? Derek, what are you talking about? We haven't even discussed any problems in our marriage. If you're unhappy about something, we can work on it together. We always have." Derek's expression remained carefully composed, but I could see something calculating behind his eyes that I had never noticed before. "I've given this a great deal of thought, and I've consulted with legal and financial advisors who have helped me understand the most equitable way to handle our separation. The documentation in that envelope explains everything in detail. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and began reading through what felt like hundreds of pages of legal documents. The language was dense and technical, but certain phrases jumped out at me like accusations: conditional gifts contingent upon successful marriage, temporary use of donor-purchased items, reversion of assets to original purchaser upon dissolution of marital contract. Derek, this document claims that you own everything in our home. The furniture, the artwork, even kitchen appliances and books. According to this, I have no legal claim to anything we've shared for 8 years. That's not entirely accurate, Derek replied in the same calm, professional tone. You'll retain ownership of items that you purchased independently, as well as your personal clothing and effects. But the major furnishings, artwork, jewelry, and household items were purchased by me as gifts, and the legal documentation supports my ownership claims. I flipped through more pages, finding itemized lists that included every significant possession in our penthouse. The engagement ring I was wearing was listed as a conditional gift pending successful completion of marriage contract. The vintage Cartier watch that Derek had claimed belonged to his grandmother was categorized as family heirloom on loan. Even the professional coffee machine that had been my birthday present was described as household equipment purchased for shared use, reverting to buyer upon dissolution. This is insane, Derek. These weren't loans or conditional gifts. These were expressions of love, symbols of our commitment to each other. You can't retroactively redefine the meaning of our entire relationship. Derek leaned forward slightly, and for the first time that evening, his mask of professional composure slipped enough to reveal something that looked almost like anticipation. I understand this is emotional for you, but the legal reality is that gifts between unmarried individuals and conditional gifts during marriage have different legal standings than joint purchases or permanent transfers of ownership. Unmarried individuals? Derek, we've been married for 8 years. And during those 8 years, I maintained detailed records of every significant purchase, every gift, and every financial transaction that involved shared assets. The documentation is comprehensive and legally sound. The scope of Derek's betrayal was beginning to sink in, but what horrified me even more than the divorce itself was the calculated nature of what he had done. This wasn't a spontaneous decision, born from relationship problems or incompatibility. This was a methodical plan that had been months, possibly years, in the making. The investor meetings, I said, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. The financial documentation you asked me to organize. The photography sessions for insurance purposes. All of that was preparation for this. Derek didn't deny it, and his silence was more damning than any confession could have been. You made me help you build the case against me. You used my own professional skills to create evidence that you're now using to claim that I have no legal right to anything in our shared life. I needed to ensure that the asset documentation was accurate and comprehensive, Derek replied, his voice taking on a defensive edge for the first time. This process is complicated enough without disputes over valuations or ownership claims. I stood up from the couch, pacing to the window that overlooked the Millbrook River, trying to process the magnitude of what Derek had done. The man I had trusted completely, had built a life with, had shared every aspect of my personal and professional world with, had been systematically planning my destruction while accepting my help in organizing the very evidence he would use against me. How long have you been planning this, Derek? When did you decide that our marriage was a business transaction that you could dissolve whenever the terms no longer suited you? Derek remained seated, watching me with an expression that combined what looked like relief with something that almost resembled admiration for my quick understanding of his strategy. "I want you out of the penthouse by the end of the week," he said, ignoring my question entirely. "My attorney will be in touch with your legal representation to coordinate the return of my property and finalize the divorce proceedings. I've arranged for a moving company to pack your personal belongings on Friday." The audacity of Derek's timeline took my breath away. Not only had he orchestrated this betrayal without giving me any opportunity to address whatever problems he claimed existed in our marriage, but he expected me to vacate our shared home within days of learning that my entire life was being dismantled. "Where exactly do you expect me to go, Derek? This penthouse has been my home for 8 years. My entire life is here." Derek finally stood up, straightening his shirt with the same careful attention to detail that I now realized had characterized his preparation for this moment. "I'm sure someone with your financial planning expertise will figure out appropriate living arrangements. You've always been resourceful when it comes to solving complex problems." As Derek walked toward his home office, clearly considering our conversation finished, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The shock and hurt that had dominated my emotions for the past hour were being replaced by something much more dangerous: absolute clarity about exactly what kind of man I had been married to and exactly what kind of response his betrayal deserved. "Derek," I called after him, my voice steady for the first time since he'd opened that envelope. "You should know that I'm going to fight this. Every single item on your list, every claim of ownership, every legal argument your attorney has prepared. I'm going to challenge all of it." Derek paused in the doorway to his office, turning back to face me with an expression of amused condescension. "With what resources, Victoria? Your salary at Pinnacle is substantial, but divorce litigation is expensive, and I control most of our liquid assets. You're welcome to try, but I think you'll find that the documentation is quite thorough." I smiled then, for the first time since Derek had started this conversation, and something in my expression made him take a step backward. "You're absolutely right that the documentation is thorough, Derek. In fact, it's so thorough that it's going to tell a very interesting story about exactly what kind of person you really are. And I think you're going to discover that I'm much more resourceful than you ever imagined." That night, after Derek retreated to his office to make what I could only assume were congratulatory phone calls to his attorney, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by everything I had believed was ours and everything Derek now claimed was his. The silence in the penthouse felt different than it ever had before, not peaceful, but hollow, as if the space itself had been drained of meaning and purpose. I didn't cry. That surprised me more than anything else about my reaction to Derek's betrayal. 8 years of marriage, a lifetime of shared dreams and accumulated memories, had just been reduced to a legal document designed to leave me with nothing, and yet tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt something much more unsettling, a strange, cold clarity that seemed to sharpen every detail of my surroundings and every implication of my situation. The first thing I did was walk through every room of the penthouse, seeing our possessions through completely different eyes. The Helena Crane painting that Derek had given me for my 30th birthday wasn't a symbol of his love and understanding, it was an investment he had made with full knowledge that he could reclaim it whenever our relationship no longer served his purposes. The vintage Cartier watch wasn't a family heirloom representing continuity and tradition, it was bait in a long-term trap that I had walked into willingly. Every gift, every gesture of generosity, every moment when I had felt grateful for Derek's thoughtfulness was now revealed as calculation disguised as affection. The man I had married and trusted completely had been documenting my reactions to his manipulation, photographing evidence of his ownership claims, and building a legal case against me while I thanked him for his love. By 3 in the morning, I had made my first decision. I wasn't leaving the penthouse on Derek's timeline. If he wanted me out, he would have to follow proper legal procedures, which would buy me time to understand exactly what I was dealing with and how to respond. I spent the rest of the night researching divorce law, tenant rights, and asset division statutes, using the same analytical skills that had made me successful at Pinnacle to dissect Derek's legal strategy. What I discovered was both encouraging and infuriating. Derek's documentation was indeed comprehensive, but it was also potentially problematic in ways that his attorney might not have fully considered. The systematic nature of his record-keeping, combined with the timing of certain purchases and the circumstances under which gifts had been given, created questions about intent and good faith that could complicate his ownership claims. More importantly, Derek's meticulous documentation revealed patterns of behavior that extended far beyond gift-giving. His financial records showed irregularities that my trained eye recognized as potential fraud indicators. The mysterious investor meetings that had consumed so much of his time corresponded with unusual cash movements and account transfers that didn't align with legitimate business operations. As dawn broke over the Millbrook River, I realized that Derek had made a critical error in his planning. By involving me in organizing his financial documentation, he had given me access to information that revealed vulnerabilities he probably didn't know he had. The same records he planned to use against me in divorce court contained evidence of activities that could destroy his business reputation and potentially result in criminal charges. My second decision was to take a week of personal leave from Pinnacle. I told my supervisor, Patricia Hammond, that I was dealing with a family emergency that required my immediate and complete attention. Patricia, who had been my mentor for 6 years, didn't ask for details but assured me that my client portfolios would be managed carefully in my absence and that I could take as much time as needed. The freedom of that week allowed me to approach Derek's betrayal like the complex financial investigation it had become. I rented a small office space in downtown Millbrook, paying cash for a month-to-month lease that gave me a private place to work without Derek's knowledge. This space became my war room, where I could analyze documents, make phone calls, and plan my response without any risk of discovery. The first professional I contacted was Elena Rodriguez, a divorce attorney whose reputation for aggressive client advocacy was legendary in Millbrook's legal community. Elena had built her practice on representing women who had been financially disadvantaged in divorce proceedings, and her track record of overturning seemingly ironclad prenuptial agreements and asset protection schemes was exactly what I needed. Mrs. Ashford, Elena said after reviewing the documents Derek had given me, "Your husband's attorney has prepared a very sophisticated case, but sophistication isn't the same thing as legal validity. Some of these ownership claims are questionable, and the documentation raises questions about your husband's intent and good faith throughout your marriage." Elena explained that Derek's systematic record-keeping could actually work against him if it could be demonstrated that he had entered the marriage with the intention of protecting his assets rather than building a genuine partnership. The photographs, detailed inventories, and careful categorization of gifts could be presented as evidence of someone who had never truly committed to the shared financial life that marriage typically represents. More concerning, Elena continued, are these financial irregularities in your husband's business records. If Mr. Ashford has been engaging in fraudulent business practices, that could affect not only the divorce proceedings but also his ability to retain any assets at all. My second consultation was with Marcus Webb, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes and corporate fraud. Marcus had worked with several of my clients at Pinnacle when they suspected business partners or investment advisors of misconduct, and his ability to uncover hidden assets and questionable transactions was exactly what I needed to understand the full scope of Derek's activities. "Mrs. Ashford," Marcus said after reviewing the financial documents I had copied before Derek served me with divorce papers, "your husband's business operations show patterns consistent with money laundering, tax evasion, and investor fraud. These aren't minor bookkeeping irregularities, these are serious criminal activities that could result in federal charges." Marcus explained that Derek's mysterious investor meetings appeared to be connected to a network of offshore accounts and shell companies that were being used to hide income and manipulate property valuations. The last-minute business trips that had seemed like evidence of Derek's success were actually meetings with financial intermediaries who were helping him move money in ways designed to avoid taxation and regulatory oversight. "The irony," Marcus continued, "is that Mr. Ashford's obsessive documentation of his personal assets makes it easier to trace the illegal movement of business funds. He's been so focused on protecting his claim to household items that he's created a paper trail showing exactly how he's been stealing from his own company and his investors." Armed with this information, I began to understand that Derek's divorce strategy wasn't just about reclaiming gifts and household possessions, it was about positioning himself to disappear with stolen money while leaving me to face any legal consequences from his business activities. The systematic asset documentation wasn't just preparation for divorce. It was preparation for flight. This realization transformed my emotional response to Derek's betrayal from hurt and shock to something much more dangerous: professional fascination. Derek had created an elaborate scheme to destroy my life while protecting himself from the consequences of his criminal activities, but he had made the mistake of involving someone whose entire career was built on detecting exactly the kind of financial misconduct he was trying to hide. My third decision was to turn Derek's own weapons against him. Every piece of documentation he had created to support his legal claims would become evidence of his criminal activities. Every photograph and inventory that demonstrated his ownership of household items would also demonstrate his ability to afford luxury goods through illegal income. Every careful record of his generosity toward me would become proof of his attempts to hide stolen money and personal assets. The woman Derek had married, trusting, collaborative, grateful for his apparent love and generosity, was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood exactly what Derek was and exactly what he had done. This new version of myself wasn't motivated by hurt feelings or wounded pride. She was motivated by a professional appreciation for strategy and a personal commitment to ensuring that Derek's betrayal cost him everything he had stolen and everything he had tried to protect. I spent the remaining days of that week creating comprehensive files on Derek's criminal activities, documenting the connections between his business fraud and his divorce strategy, and developing a timeline that would demonstrate how he had used our marriage as cover for increasingly serious illegal activities. By the time I was ready to return to our penthouse, I had transformed from Derek's victim into his most dangerous enemy. The final step in my metamorphosis was returning to the penthouse and acting as if Derek's timeline and expectations were reasonable. I packed some personal belongings, made arrangements to stay temporarily with my colleague Rebecca Whitmore, and told Derek that I needed a few days to process everything before we could discuss the practical details of our separation. Derek seemed relieved by what he interpreted as my acceptance of his terms. He didn't realize that my calm demeanor wasn't resignation, it was the controlled focus of someone who had spent a week planning his complete destruction. The naive woman who had helped Derek organize evidence against herself was gone. In her place was someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't emotional, it was systematic, comprehensive. An absolutely devastating. My counterattack began exactly 1 week after Derek served me with divorce papers, on a crisp Tuesday morning when he left for what he believed would be a routine meeting with the Millbrook Planning Commission about permits for his newest development project. While Derek was presenting architectural plans for Westfield Gardens, a luxury residential complex that represented the crown jewel of Ashford Development's portfolio, I was across town delivering a comprehensive financial crimes report to the offices of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh had been investigating financial fraud in Millbrook's real estate sector for 3 years, following money trails that connected several prominent developers to offshore tax avoidance schemes and investor manipulation. When I called her office requesting an urgent meeting about evidence of federal crimes involving real estate development fraud, Agent Walsh cleared her entire morning schedule. "Mrs. Ashford," Agent Walsh said after reviewing the documentation I had compiled, "this is exactly the kind of systematic financial misconduct we've been looking for. Your husband's records show patterns consistent with money laundering, securities fraud, and conspiracy to defraud investors on a scale that could result in decades of federal prison time." The beauty of Derek's own documentation was that it provided a complete roadmap of his criminal activities. His meticulous record-keeping, which he had intended to protect his personal assets in divorce proceedings, actually demonstrated how he had been systematically stealing from Ashford Development's investors and using the stolen funds to purchase the very household items he was now claiming as his exclusive property, the Westfield Gardens project, which Derek was presenting to the Planning Commission that very morning, was funded entirely through what appeared to be legitimate investor contributions. However, Derek's own financial records showed that he had been diverting nearly 40% of these investment funds into personal accounts, using the money to purchase artwork, jewelry, and luxury goods that he classified as business expenses or client entertainment costs. Agent Walsh was particularly interested in Derek's relationship with a network of offshore shell companies that appeared to exist solely for the purpose of obscuring the source and destination of investment funds. The mysterious business trips that Derek had taken over the past year corresponded exactly with transactions involving these companies, creating a clear pattern of someone who was actively managing a complex money laundering operation. The scope of this fraud extends far beyond your personal situation, Agent Walsh explained. Mr. Ashford appears to be operating what amounts to a Ponzi scheme, using new investor funds to pay returns to existing investors while diverting substantial amounts for personal use. When this scheme collapses, dozens of families could lose their retirement savings. While Derek was presenting his architectural vision for Westfield Gardens to city officials, federal agents were already beginning the process of freezing his business accounts and obtaining warrants to search his offices. The timing wasn't coincidental. I had specifically chosen to deliver my evidence on a day when Derek would be in a very public setting, surrounded by city officials and potential investors who would witness the beginning of his professional destruction. My second strategic move involved Derek's largest client, Riverside Holdings, a commercial real estate investment firm that had entrusted Ashford Development with managing over $50 million in property development projects. Riverside CEO, Catherine Sterling, was someone I had known professionally for years through my work at Pinnacle, and she had always struck me as someone who valued integrity and thorough due diligence above all else. "Catherine," I said during our carefully scheduled lunch meeting at the Millbrook Country Club, "I've discovered some concerning information about financial irregularities in Derek's business operations, and I thought you should be aware of potential risks to Riverside's investments." I didn't need to make accusations or present detailed evidence. Catherine Sterling hadn't built Riverside Holdings into one of the region's most successful investment firms by ignoring red flags or failing to investigate potential problems with business partners. Simply mentioning that irregularities existed was enough to trigger a comprehensive audit of every project that Ashford Development was managing for Riverside. Catherine's response was swift and decisive. Victoria, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Riverside will be conducting an immediate review of all our agreements with Ashford Development, and will be engaging external auditors to verify the status of our invested funds. By the end of that week, Riverside Holdings had frozen all payments to Ashford Development pending the completion of their audit. More damaging to Derek's immediate cash flow, they had also notified other major clients about their concerns, triggering a cascade of similar audits and payment freezes throughout Derek's client base, the third phase of my professional attack. Focused on Derek's banking relationships and credit facilities. Ashford Development operated on substantial lines of credit that allowed Derek to begin new projects before investment funds were fully secured. These credit facilities were contingent upon Derek's personal guarantee and his company's demonstrated track record of successful project completion and investor satisfaction. Using information from Marcus Webb's investigation, I was able to identify specific instances where Derek had provided false financial statements to secure these credit lines. Bank loan applications that claimed certain projects were fully funded actually represented situations where Derek had already diverted significant portions of investor money for personal use. I didn't approach Derek's banks directly. That would have been too obvious and potentially legally problematic. Instead, I arranged for anonymous tips to be sent to the bank's fraud prevention departments, providing specific account numbers and transaction dates that would trigger internal investigations. Banks are notoriously cautious about any hint of fraudulent activity, and even the suggestion of problems with loan documentation is enough to freeze credit facilities pending thorough review. Within 10 days of my campaign beginning, Derek had lost access to nearly $3 million in credit facilities. Projects that were scheduled to begin construction were suddenly without funding, and contractors who had been hired for upcoming developments were informed that their contracts were being suspended pending financial restructuring. The fourth element of my strategy involved Derek's professional reputation within Millbrook's tight-knit development community. Real estate development is a relationship-based business where reputation and trust are essential for securing new projects and maintaining investor confidence. Derek's success had been built on his image as a reliable, innovative developer who delivered projects on time and provided strong returns for investors. I began strategically sharing concerns about Derek's business practices with key figures in Millbrook's development community. These weren't gossip sessions or emotional accusations, they were professional conversations where I expressed concern about financial irregularities that could affect the entire industry's reputation if they became public knowledge. Thomas Brookfield, who had served as our financial advisor throughout our marriage, was particularly influential in this community. When I shared with Thomas the evidence of Derek's systematic investor fraud, his reaction was immediate and decisive. Victoria, if what you're telling me is accurate, Derek's activities could trigger regulatory investigations that affect every developer in the region. I have a responsibility to protect my other clients from potential association with these problems. Thomas's influence extended throughout Millbrook's investment community, and his subtle warnings about Ashford Development created a ripple effect that reached potential investors, project partners, and municipal officials who were evaluating Derek's permit applications and development proposals. The cumulative effect of these coordinated attacks became visible during Derek's presentation to the Millbrook Planning Commission about Westfield Gardens. What should have been a routine approval process for a developer with Derek's track record instead became a tense interrogation about his company's financial stability and ability to complete the proposed project. Planning Commission Chairman Robert Hayes, who had previously been enthusiastic about Derek's development proposals, suddenly expressed concerns about Ashford Development's capacity to manage such an ambitious project given recent questions about the company's financial management and Investor relations. Derek's permit application for Westfield Gardens was tabled pending a comprehensive review of his company's financial statements and proof of adequate funding for project completion. This delay effectively killed the project, since the investment timeline required immediate permit approval to maintain investor confidence and secure construction financing. By the end of my first month of strategic attacks, Derek's business empire was hemorrhaging money, losing clients, and facing federal investigation. The man who had been so confident about his legal strategy for reclaiming household items was suddenly struggling to maintain basic business operations. His morning routine changed from reviewing architectural plans to frantically calling attorneys, accountants, and business partners who were increasingly reluctant to take his calls. The most satisfying aspect of this systematic destruction was that Derek still had no idea who was responsible for his rapidly deteriorating situation. He suspected that federal investigations might be related to industry-wide scrutiny of development practices, and he assumed that client concerns were natural responses to market uncertainty. The possibility that his soon-to-be ex-wife was orchestrating his professional annihilation never seemed to occur to him. Derek's arrogance and underestimation of my capabilities were serving as perfect cover for my campaign. While he focused on divorce proceedings and asset protection, I was systematically destroying the criminal enterprise that had funded our entire lifestyle. The gifts he was so desperate to reclaim were about to become evidence in federal criminal cases, and the business success he was so proud of was about to be revealed as an elaborate fraud that would cost him everything he had worked to build. 2 months into my campaign against Derek, his professional destruction was so complete that he could no longer maintain the facade of business success that had defined his identity for over a decade. Ashford Development's offices had been raided by federal agents, his business accounts remained frozen pending criminal investigation, and former clients were filing civil lawsuits seeking recovery of their invested funds. But Derek's personal humiliation was just beginning. The federal investigation had attracted significant media attention, with the Millbrook Business Journal running a front-page exposé titled "Local Developer Under Investigation for Massive Investor Fraud." The article, which included photographs of federal agents carrying boxes of evidence from Derek's offices, effectively ended any possibility that he could rebuild his professional reputation or secure new business relationships. More devastating for Derek personally was the reaction of Millbrook's social elite, the very community where he had built his identity as a successful entrepreneur and respected business leader. Catherine Sterling, whose husband David owned 3 of the city's most exclusive restaurants, quietly informed other members of the Millbrook Country Club about her company's experiences with Ashford Development's financial irregularities. The Country Club community was remarkably insular and protective of its reputation. When rumors began circulating about Derek's potential involvement in investment fraud, the club's board of directors initiated their own review of his membership status. The possibility of criminal charges against a member was considered incompatible with the club's standards of integrity and community standing. Derek's membership at the Millbrook Country Club was suspended pending the resolution of his legal troubles. This seemingly administrative action carried profound social implications, effectively excluding Derek from the network of relationships that had sustained both his business success and his personal identity. Golf outings, charity fundraisers, and business dinners that had been central to Derek's social life were suddenly off-limits. The suspension from the country club triggered a cascade of similar exclusions throughout Millbrook's social landscape. The Riverside Foundation, where Derek had served on the board of directors for 5 years, requested his resignation to avoid any appearance of association with criminal activity. The Millbrook Chamber of Commerce revoked his membership, and the Business Development Council removed him from their advisory committee. Derek's family relationships began to fracture under the pressure of public scandal and criminal investigation. His parents, Harrison and Margaret Ashford, who had built their own successful consulting business on principles of ethical conduct and community respect, were horrified by the allegations against their son. Harrison's reputation in Millbrook's business community had taken decades to build, and Derek's criminal activities threatened to destroy the family name entirely. The elder Ashfords made the painful decision to publicly distance themselves from Derek's business activities. Harrison issued a statement through his attorney clarifying that Ashford Consulting had no business relationship with Ashford Development and expressing confidence that the legal system would determine the truth about the allegations against his son. More personally devastating for Derek was his parents' decision to revoke his access to the family trust fund that had provided financial security throughout his adult life. The trust's terms included provisions for protecting family assets from criminal liability, and the trustees determined that Derek's potential criminal exposure made continued distributions too risky for the fund's integrity. Derek's younger sister, Amanda, who worked as a marketing executive for a prestigious advertising firm in a neighboring city, found herself facing uncomfortable questions from colleagues and clients about her family connections. Amanda's professional reputation was being damaged by association with Derek's criminal activities, forcing her to choose between family loyalty and career preservation. In a conversation that I learned about through mutual acquaintances, Amanda had apparently told Derek that she could no longer afford to be associated with his legal troubles. Her company had specifically instructed her to avoid any public appearances or professional activities that might link the firm to Derek's criminal investigation. The social isolation extended to Derek's personal relationships and daily life in Millbrook. Restaurants where he had been a regular customer began treating him with obvious discomfort, and service providers who had courted his business were suddenly unavailable or unresponsive to his calls. The luxury car dealership where Derek had purchased vehicles for years declined to approve financing for a new lease, citing concerns about his financial stability. Derek's attempts to maintain his social connections became increasingly desperate and transparent. He started showing up uninvited to charity events and business gatherings where his presence created awkward tension for other attendees. Event organizers began quietly informing Derek that his attendance would not be appropriate given the ongoing federal investigation. The psychological pressure of this comprehensive social rejection was taking a visible toll on Derek's behavior and appearance. Marcus Webb's surveillance reports described a man who looked increasingly haggard and desperate, someone who had clearly not anticipated the full scope of consequences that would follow from his criminal activities being exposed. Derek's living situation became another source of stress and humiliation. The penthouse that had been the symbol of his success was now associated with criminal activity in the minds of Millbrook's residents. The building's management company, concerned about negative publicity affecting other residents, began pressuring Derek to consider relocating to protect the building's reputation. More practically, Derek was struggling to afford the penthouse's maintenance costs without access to his business income or family trust fund. The mortgage payments, homeowners association fees, and utility costs that had been easily manageable during his successful years were becoming financial burdens that strained his remaining liquid assets. Derek's dating life, which had apparently begun during the final months of our marriage, became another source of personal humiliation. The women who had been attracted to his wealth, status, and reputation as a successful developer were notably less interested in associating with someone facing federal criminal charges and social ostracism. Through my network of social connections, I learned that Derek had been rejected by several women who had initially seemed interested in his romantic attention. The prospect of being associated with someone under criminal investigation was apparently too damaging to their own social standing to justify continued involvement. Derek's mental state was deteriorating under the combined pressure of professional destruction, social isolation, family rejection, and personal humiliation. Marcus Webb reported observing Derek at various locations around Millbrook, often appearing agitated and talking to himself, sometimes drinking alone at establishments where he had previously been part of social groups. The most satisfying aspect of Derek's personal destruction was watching him realize that his carefully planned divorce strategy was becoming irrelevant. The household items and personal assets that he had been so determined to reclaim through legal proceedings were now subject to federal asset forfeiture proceedings as evidence of his criminal activities. Derek's attorney, Ronald Pierce, who had initially been confident about the divorce case, was now advising Derek that recovering household items was the least of his legal concerns. The engagement ring, jewelry, and artwork that Derek had documented so meticulously were likely to be seized by federal authorities as proceeds of criminal activity, regardless of who technically owned them under divorce law. The irony of Derek's situation was becoming clear even to him. His obsessive documentation of personal assets, which was supposed to protect his wealth from divorce proceedings, had instead provided federal investigators with a comprehensive inventory of items purchased with stolen investor funds. Every photograph, receipt, and valuation estimate that Derek had created was now evidence of money laundering and fraud. Derek's attempts to contact me became increasingly frantic as his situation deteriorated. He left voicemails claiming that he needed to discuss important developments in our divorce case, but his real motivation was clearly desperation about his criminal legal troubles. Derek seemed to believe that I might be willing to provide some form of character testimony that could help his defense. I didn't return his calls. The woman who had once felt guilty about Derek's work stress and had tried to support his professional success no longer existed. In her place was someone who took professional satisfaction in watching Derek face the consequences of his own choices and actions. The final element of Derek's personal destruction came when the Internal Revenue Service initiated their own investigation of his tax filings for the previous 7 years. The systematic underreporting of income from his criminal activities meant that Derek faced not only federal criminal charges but also massive tax penalties and potential additional criminal liability for tax evasion. Derek's life had become a perfect storm of legal, financial, social, and personal disasters, all stemming from his decision to betray the one person who had been completely loyal to him and who possessed the skills and knowledge necessary to destroy him completely. The man who had been so confident about his ability to manipulate legal proceedings and control the terms of our separation was learning that some opponents are far more dangerous than they appear. The courtroom where Derek had once confidently demanded the return of every gift he'd ever given me was now the setting for his sentencing hearing on federal charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud investors. 6 months after his arrest, Derek stood before Judge Patricia Morrison wearing an ill-fitting public defender's suit, having exhausted his remaining assets on legal fees that proved inadequate against the overwhelming evidence of his criminal enterprise. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, not as the bitter ex-wife seeking revenge, but as a key witness whose cooperation with federal investigators had been instrumental in building the case against Derek. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh had publicly commended my assistance in exposing what she called one of the most sophisticated real estate fraud schemes we've encountered in this region. The prosecution's case was devastating in its thoroughness. Derek's own meticulous documentation, the very records he had created to reclaim household items in our divorce, provided investigators with a complete roadmap of his criminal activities. Every photograph of jewelry and artwork, every receipt for luxury goods, every inventory list that Derek had prepared for our asset division became evidence of money laundering and investor fraud. Mr. Ashford, Judge Morrison said as she reviewed the sentencing recommendations, your crimes represented profound betrayal of trust that affected dozens of families and caused financial damage exceeding $12 million. The systematic nature of your criminal enterprise, combined with your attempts to use legal proceedings to legitimize stolen assets, demonstrates a level of calculation and deception that requires significant punishment. Derek was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. The judge also ordered complete restitution to defrauded investors, asset forfeiture of all property purchased with criminal proceeds, and a lifetime ban from working in financial services or real estate development. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at me for the first time since his arrest. The man who had once been so confident about his ability to manipulate legal proceedings and control the terms of our separation now looked broken, confused, and finally aware of exactly who had orchestrated his destruction. I felt no satisfaction in Derek's personal suffering, but I experienced deep professional pride in the precision and effectiveness of my strategic response to his betrayal. The same analytical skills that had made me successful at Pinnacle Investment Group had proven equally devastating when applied to exposing financial crimes and protecting innocent investors from further harm. The civil litigation that followed. Derek's criminal conviction provided additional vindication for my decision to fight his divorce demands. Every item that Derek had claimed as his exclusive property was determined by the court to have been purchased with stolen investor funds, making his ownership claims legally invalid regardless of gift documentation or marriage laws. The engagement ring that Derek had demanded be returned as a conditional gift was sold at auction, with proceeds distributed to defrauded investors. The vintage Cartier watch that he claimed was a family heirloom was revealed to have been purchased with money stolen from the Westfield Gardens project. Even kitchen appliances and furniture were liquidated to help compensate victims of Derek's fraud. The penthouse that had been our shared home for 8 years was also subject to asset forfeiture, but the court's investigation revealed that Derek had used fraudulent financial statements to qualify for the mortgage. The property was seized and sold, with the bank suffering losses that were ultimately attributed to Derek's criminal misrepresentation of his income and assets. My own financial situation improved dramatically during this period. The cooperation agreement I had signed with federal prosecutors included provisions protecting me from any civil liability related to Derek's criminal activities, since investigators had determined that I was an unknowing victim rather than a co-conspirator. More importantly, my role in exposing Derek's fraud had enhanced my professional reputation in ways I had never anticipated. Patricia Hammond promoted me to managing director at Pinnacle Investment Group, recognizing that my analytical skills and ethical standards made me invaluable for protecting the firm's clients from similar fraudulent schemes. Victoria, Patricia said during my promotion ceremony, "Your commitment to financial integrity and client protection represents the highest standards of our profession. Your actions in the Ashford case demonstrate exactly the kind of moral courage and professional excellence that defines Pinnacle's values." The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, equity participation in the firm, and recognition as one of Millbrook's most respected financial professionals. Clients who had followed the Derek Ashford case through media coverage were impressed by my role in exposing the fraud and protecting investor interests, leading to significant new business for both me personally and Pinnacle as a firm. My social standing in Millbrook's business community was transformed as well. The same country club that had expelled Derek now invited me to join their board of directors, recognizing my contributions to protecting the community from financial predators. The Riverside Foundation asked me to chair their investment committee. Trusting my ability to identify legitimate opportunities while avoiding fraudulent schemes, the personal growth that emerged from this experience was perhaps more valuable than any professional advancement. The naive woman who had trusted Derek completely and had been grateful for his apparent generosity was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood the importance of independence, who valued genuine integrity over superficial charm, and who possessed the confidence that comes from surviving betrayal and emerging stronger. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, I received a letter from him in federal prison. The letter was brief and carefully worded, clearly reviewed by prison officials and his attorney, but the message was unmistakable. Victoria, I understand now what I lost when I betrayed your trust. Not just our marriage, but the partnership. With the one person who truly understood me and could have helped me build something legitimate and lasting. I hope someday you can forgive the man I became, even if you can never forgive what I did to us. I read the letter once and then filed it away without responding. Derek's apology, like his gifts during our marriage, felt calculated rather than genuine. He wasn't sorry for his criminal activities or for the harm he had caused to innocent investors. He was sorry that his betrayal had cost him everything he had worked to build. The final chapter of the Derek Ashford case came when the last of his assets were liquidated and distributed to victims of his fraud. The total recovery was approximately $8 million, leaving many investors with significant losses but providing some measure of compensation for their faith in Derek's false promises. A year after Derek's sentencing, I was featured on the cover of Millbrook Business Monthly as Financial Professional of the Year, recognized for my role in exposing corporate fraud and protecting investor interests. The article described my transformation from fraud victim to community protector, highlighting how my analytical skills and ethical standards had prevented further harm to innocent families. The interview for that article included a question about whether I felt Derek's punishment was appropriate for his crimes. My response reflected the professional perspective I had developed through this experience. Mr. Ashford's sentence reflects the serious nature of his crimes and sends an important message about accountability in our business community. My focus has always been on protecting innocent investors and ensuring that financial professionals maintain the highest ethical standards. The legal system has handled Mr. Ashford's case appropriately, and I'm grateful that justice was served for all the families who were harmed by his actions. As I sat in my new corner office at Pinnacle, reviewing portfolios for clients who trusted me with their life savings, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. Derek's betrayal had been designed to destroy my life and leave me with nothing while he escaped with stolen money and a new identity in some distant location. Instead, his calculated cruelty had revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed, had led to professional opportunities one had never imagined, and had demonstrated that integrity and intelligence were more powerful weapons than manipulation and deception. The gifts Derek had been so desperate to reclaim, the jewelry, artwork, and luxury goods that he had documented so meticulously, were gone forever, sold to compensate his victims. But what he had really lost was something far more valuable: the loyalty and partnership of someone who could have helped him build a legitimate empire instead of a criminal enterprise. Derek had wanted to write me out of his story, to reduce me to a footnote in his narrative of success and reinvention. Instead, I had become the author of his complete destruction, using his own weapons against him with precision that he had never imagined possible. The woman who emerged from this experience was stronger, wiser, and more successful than the one Derek had tried to destroy. And unlike Derek's stolen wealth, the integrity and professional reputation I had built would last for the rest of my life. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we hand-picked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.